I am Colton McLean, and this is my colleague,
Noah Schultz.
and we are from Riverton High School. Today we are data analysts advising healthy clean air for all, and we will be discussing air pollution in New York City as well as possible solutions.
I would like to first begin with the structure of our presentation. We will look into the extent of the issue and in the introduction. Then we will analyze the trends and connections in the data. Furthermore, we will provide suggestions as a means to resolve the problem at hand. Then we would like to conclude the presentation by summarizing the discoveries we have made.
The first thing in recent memory that pertains to air pollution is the 2023 Canadian wildfires, which highlights the need to combat this looming threat. This incident, while unfortunate, made a point that in our business and industrial-minded society, we need to combat air pollution.
Diving into the deeper aspect of air pollution in New York City, we will cover the three major pollutants: nitrogen dioxide, fine particles, and ozone, which contributes to the air pollution the most out of the three. It is important to recognize what factors contribute to the creation of these pollutants to have a better understanding of how they can be combated.
The factors contributing to the creation of these pollutants are as follows. For ozone, the contributing factor is vehicle and power plant emissions, more specifically the combination of these chemicals since it's a secondary pollutant. For nitrogen dioxide, the contributing factor is vehicular and industrial emissions, although unlike ozone, it is a primary pollutant since it can be directly emitted through vehicles' exhaust. Lastly, for fine particles, the contributing factor is mainly wildfires, but it can also be emitted through vehicular emissions.
To begin our deeper analysis, we will discuss each pollutant separately. The first pollution and the strongest contributor to air pollution is ozone. The ozone levels in New York City have remained relatively the same throughout the past decade. This is likely because ozone is a secondary pollutant, so there is no direct source to reduce.
The consequences of not acting on high ozone concentrations have been discovered through research. It has been shown in several studies that children who live in areas with high ozone concentrations suffer from respiratory illness, and it is often harder for them to develop their lungs. High ozone concentrations have adverse effects on the elderly as well, causing lung dysfunction.
While it may seem there may not be any significant ways to combat ozone, efforts are being made to reduce these emissions.
Moving into the next pollutants, nitrogen dioxide and fine particles, we can see a downward trend. This shows signs of progression being made in the reduction of the pollutants.
A large network of air quality monitoring stations that are responsible for this progress work hand in hand with the Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as the EPA. While these pollutants are on a decline, there are still actions that can be taken to support the EPA standards and regulations.
Speaking of EPA standards, traffic density has become a significantly larger problem. It is shown that there has been an increase in vehicle emissions coinciding with the number of vehicles there are. The graph to the right represents the traffic density in New York City, and the shaded portions of the graph have a direct correlation with areas of higher pollution.
The increase in vehicles is counteracting the effects that are being made to reduce air pollution. We will have suggestions later in this presentation to combat this problem. Transitioning into hospitalization and emergency department visits, we can see a steady decline, which correlates with the decline in nitrogen dioxide and fine particle levels.
Considering that air pollution is heavily responsible for respiratory illness, this correlation amongst the data makes sense. Despite the decline, there can be spikes in asthma ED visits since there is a direct connection between fine particles and asthma. Since fine particles are susceptible to spikes from wildfires, the same can be said for asthma ED visits.
Continuing with our suggestions, we will discuss four subcategories. Our suggestions will begin with public safety and emergency response, and then transition in community efforts and transportation. Then we will discuss laws and regulations, and conclude with green life and awareness.
Public safety and emergency response. It was stated by Mayor Adams of New York City that the best thing for New York citizens was to stay inside and close their windows. Yet, for those with pre-existing health conditions, this isn't as reliable of an option. This is why there must be precautions in place, such as N95 masks, as well as an air pollution-free shelter with a superb air conditioning system for those in high-risk areas. It is also important that information regarding potential air pollution spikes is sent out to high-risk areas as well as hospitals so there is time to prepare. These measures will improve public safety and will contribute to an effective response.
Community efforts and transportation. As a nonprofit organization, it is crucial that Clean Air for All advocates for community efforts. Having community members volunteer to clean public transportation, such as subway stations and buses, will promote public transportation, reducing the amount of traffic density and providing a cleaner environment. The efforts of the community would also contribute to the air quality in the work environment.
Laws and regulations. The large quantity of emissions are emitted through two main sources. The first main source is industries. And in efforts to combat the high emission production, we must set a temporary limit on the amount of pollution an industry can produce. The Clean Air Act may already be in place, but it doesn't mean we can't take proactive measures to ensure healthy air quality. An example of a proactive measure that could be taken is replacing high-emission boilers with efficient boilers that produce less emissions.
The second main source is vehicles, which produce high levels of almost all pollutants. The first step that can be taken to combat these emissions is reducing traffic density, as previously mentioned, which would be to set restrictions on idling. The Environmental Defense Fund stated that there are 130,000 tons of emissions being produced in New York City just from vehicles idling, so it is almost a necessity that there is a fine set in place for idling to reduce vehicular emissions.
Green life and awareness. Setting up green infrastructure such as urban rooftop gardens or ground trees can work to filter out pollutants such as PM 2.5. It is also shown in a recent study by UMass in 2023 that every square meter of garden would counteract the emissions from one vehicle for a whole year. These green life efforts have also been proven to work. According to the EPA, the U.S. has proven that federal environmental policies can be effective, as shown by the Clean Air Act, which regulates all sources of air emissions.
Taking into consideration that Clean Air for All is a nonprofit organization, they should have to spread public awareness and promote green life. If the community was aware of it, how a tiny contribution from them can significantly decrease air pollution and improve working conditions, there could be a drastic decrease in the amount of air pollution and a strengthening of resilience of air quality in New York City to combat future pollution.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
6 minutes.